Hello everyone, it is so good to see you and the rest of the GVG crew here today. They're hiding right now, but you'll hear them soon enough. We've assembled everyone on the crew to talk about a genre that has no shortage of games on the Nintendo Switch, and one of my favorites, RPGs. We all chose about 5 games to talk about here today, some more than others with titles within the same series. And because there are so many RPGs on the Switch, there is very likely something that you love that we just weren't able to touch on. Please don't be mad. But what did we choose to highlight here today? Well, I'll stop yapping and let the others take it from here. Yeah, that's new.
The first Octopath Traveler was good. It introduced us to HD 2D for the first time, a striking new visual style. And while the combat was familiar, there was also a lot of depth and new ideas in there. But it had its weaknesses. Not all characters were equal. Not all characters were interesting, even. There was a lot of room for improvement, and Octopath Traveler 2 improves everything. Every single character is better than the original game. The visuals are better than the original game. The soundtrack is better than the original game. The connective tissue exists this time. Octopath Traveler 2 is one of those rare games that just improves everything the predecessor did. It is several leagues ahead of the original, and rivals some of Square's Golden Age RPGs. No hyperbole, it is that good. You know, I thought with all these HD 2D remakes like Dragon Quest and Live Alive, that Octopath would kind of be left in the dust and the legacy be forgotten. But Octopath 2 shows that it is truly capable of being memorable. And Octopath 0 is continuing that legacy, coming later for Switch 1 and Switch 2.
Monster Hunter Stories 2 takes all the monsters you know and love from the main Monster Hunter series and finally puts them underneath our control as the player. As a longtime fan of Monster Hunter, every time I go to a new area, I'm so excited to see which of my favorite monsters is going to show up next. But even if you haven't played Monster Hunter, there is so much to love here. The game has beautiful cel-shaded visuals, voice acting in its cutscenes, and a combat system I find genuinely engaging. Stories uses a rock-paper-scissors style combat system. There are power attacks, speed attacks, and technical attacks. Power beats technical, technical beats speed, and speed beats power. The type of move that a monster is going to use against you depends on what that monster is and its characteristics. As a new player, you'll learn these things over time. As a Monster Hunter veteran, you might be able to intuit that information for yourself right away. It emulates the design of Monster Hunter really well, where you as a player have to learn the monster's moves and how to combat them. The translation to turn-based combat was done really well here. Nothing can beat running around with my favorite monsters in Monster Hunter, and especially that exciting feeling of hunting for rare eggs in the post-game. You'll still be fighting monsters to get their materials in order to make your own gear, but it's done so in a lot less intimidating way. You'll have to play the game for yourself in order to uncover the secrets of the Razewing Rathalos, but it's an experience I'm sure you'll come to love.
The setup of CrossCode doesn't seem all that unique at first. It's a trope that's been done many times before. You play a character who is stuck in an MMO, and you have to figure out why that is, what's going on, and how it all connects, while also living out a very MMO-type experience. But CrossCode changes it up almost immediately by having a protagonist that is unwillingly mute, but something within their code makes it so that they can't, outside of a few key words that somebody who's talking to them from the outside world is able to give. And it leads to a series of interactions that are fun, interesting, and stand up all on their own. And this is outside of the combat, which is pure action RPG goodness. This is not a turn-based MMO. This is all about the action, and you are going to be fighting a lot of different enemies and encouraged to push yourself to your limits, because the more you carry a combo forward, the more items you'll be rewarded with, and those items can then be traded in for even better goodies that allow you to upgrade your character and so forth. However, if you die, you lose them. But if you stop that combo and take a break, your health will regenerate, allowing you to sort of decide, how far am I willing to go with this? Of course, the challenge otherwise becomes, hey, we're going to throw a lot of enemies at you, and now you have to survive, and good luck. It makes for an interesting combat system with a great story and characters that I really did come to care about. And it makes you use your brain. Ostensibly, there are 4 dungeons that you have to solve, and a few more if you get the DLC, where the environmental puzzles are some of the most challenging I've had to experience in a while. I had to really put my mind to it and figure out how some of this works, and it's completely doable. It's just not one of those games where you figure everything out immediately. And while that can be frustrating in the moment, in retrospect it's one of those that I just have a fondness for. I came into CrossCode not expecting a whole lot, and ended up with a pretty great action RPG that I highly recommend to anybody who has not experienced it yet.
Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE is a unique combination of Fire Emblem, Shin Megami Tensei, and perhaps the last thing you'd associate with either franchise, the Japanese idol culture. But it somehow blends these three into an RPG that's like no other. You take on the role of Itsuki, who witnesses firsthand his friend Tsubasa's rise into the idol industry with Fortuna Entertainments. The plot centers around beings known as Mirages, who harvest energy known as Performa from people. The fellow personalities that work under Fortuna are capable of using certain Mirages, each taking the personality of a character from Fire Emblem, like Chrom, Sita, and Tharja. On one side, you're experiencing the colorful story taking place in and around Shibuya. You'll build your Mirages as well as relations with your party, sort of like support conversations and social links. On the other side, you're exploring dungeons, solving puzzles, and engaging in some pretty interesting combats. It combines strengths and weaknesses of weapons from Fire Emblem and magic from SMT. When you strike a weakness, your party members will follow up with another attack known as a session. This is an interpretation of the press turn system in Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, and it's quite satisfying. As the game progresses, you can eventually link huge sessions throughout your party, making this one of the most enjoyable turn-based battle systems that I've ever played with. In short, this game is like a Shin Megami Tensei Lite, not as difficult as the core series and with a drastically different vibe from your usual entry. The style is so bright and colorful, from the UI to the way battles take place on a stage with an audience. This game took a much different approach than I think any of us were expecting based on its initial announcement. But I think the game's visual identity benefits from not being too strictly tied to either contributing properties.
I bet any of you watching can mention a game where it really doesn't start until you finish the story, but the Disgaea series has been doing that for probably way longer than any game you've thought of. Way back since the PS2 era, Disgaea games have been some of the lengthiest play sessions available, particularly in their postgame, and Disgaea 5 is not only not an exception to that, but it is the best game in the series. For my money, it has the most likable cast of characters, it has the best narrative, and it still packs loads of gameplay. If you want to upgrade a weapon, you're going into a dungeon to do so. There are enemies that go all the way up to level 9,999 for you to beat that are practically invincible, and they're thrown in your face right at the beginning. Just do me a favor, give this one a look. You'll probably end up sinking hundreds of hours into it the same way I have.
The second game from Quebec-based indie developer Sabotage Studio, who first made the excellent Ninja Gaiden-inspired platformer The Messenger, Sea of Stars is a distant prequel taking place in the same universe. An obvious love letter to beloved JRPG classics like Chrono Trigger and Lufia 2, with a bit of Illusion of Gaia mixed in there to sweeten the deal, Sea of Stars shines with a snappy turn-based battle system, gorgeous pixel art visuals, and an earwormy soundtrack featuring guest composer Yasunori Mitsuda of Chrono Trigger and Xenogears fame. While it's rightly criticized for a somewhat average story that's slow to start and some extremely bland writing, particularly for its two main characters, I do believe Sea of Stars gets a lot more right than it does wrong, and is well worth your time if you're a fan of the classic games that inspired it.
Dragon Quest III is one of the most important RPGs of all time, and when you compare it to modern JRPGs, not that much has really changed. So when they remade the game for HD 2D, the foundation was pretty much left alone. They've rebalanced some things, but the game is still very much the NES game, now just in beautiful HD 2D, orchestrated with voice acting. It is just a remarkable presentation overhaul for a true RPG classic. This is very much a self-insert game and way ahead of its time. You customize your entire party, you can decide whether they're mages, whether they're warriors, and so on and so on. And even though this is an NES game, it's got everything you'd expect. You can go sailing in the sea, you can take to the sky and fly. This is the grandfather of RPGs, and it's so cool to see it with so much respect to the presentation.
I had been waiting eons for someone to make a game like the classic Mario Tennis and Mario Golf games on Game Boy Color. If you haven't played these yourself, one, you should, but two, they feature full single-player RPG stories, where you'll be competing in matches, gaining experience, and using skill points in order to make yourself better. Golf Story finally answered my prayers, and we have a great new version of that experience on Nintendo Switch. You'll start at a rundown golf course, learning the basics, exploring the world, and, oddly enough, using your golf skills to solve puzzles and overcome challenges. They really break up the gameplay in a fun way in Golf Story. The scenarios you end up are insane, like at one point there's a zombie attack. You know, normal stuff for a golf game. But one of my favorite things about Golf Story is at any point, anywhere in the world, you can just whip out your golf club and golf ball and just hit them. You can make for some interesting situations for yourself by doing this. And then the golf mechanics themselves, they're really good. I think this is a really competent golf game in addition to being an RPG. It's short, it's silly, it's fun. You should try it.
Live Alive is a game I wasn't really aware of until the HD 2D remake was announced, and I had no idea about its pedigree or how much people really wanted it to come over or how it was considered a lost great that never got localized. That was all over my head, but all that stuff came to the forefront as soon as this was announced, and it was hard not to get hyped for it. The idea of finally getting something that was exclusive to Japan for so long is always kind of a victory when it comes to preservation, so I absolutely wanted to support it. It also helped that it just looked fantastic, and yeah, it's really good. It is a game not afraid to just try something different. Across all the scenarios, while sharing a similar battle system, they don't all play alike. They have different goals, they have different storylines, they have different ways that you go through those storylines. And while the battle system is great and is fun enough on its own, it's those individual stories that really bring you in. And especially once you actually finish all of them and see the final scenario where everything comes together in ways that I had no idea would be even a thing, and made for the last bit to be surprisingly different than I ever expected based on everything that had come before. It's a game that succeeds on variety, and each story doesn't take long to complete, so it makes for a nice short burst of story before moving on to the next one, and you get more and more invested as you go along. Obviously, there'll be favorites over others, but it's still well worth playing, and if you haven't tried Live Alive yet, yeah, absolutely fix that.
I'm not sure how much introduction Persona 3, 4, and 5 needs at this point. You're a pretty high school boy who transfers into a new school and gets wrapped up in fighting shadows with about 7 best friends or so because a man with a long nose told you to. The end. I'm just kidding. We've come such a long way since I was playing the niche Persona 3 Fest on the PlayStation 2. Now we can play Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Golden, and Persona 5 Royal all on the Switch. Each one follows the format of an in-game calendar system. Your goal is to utilize your time to either build relations with people in your community or traverse dungeons while fighting shadows and fusing more powerful personas. You know, the usual high school fare. 5 really pushed the series into the mainstream and is filled with such style. I have never seen a game execute its design so boldly and proudly, where it seeps into the menus, the characters, the acid jazz-infused soundtrack, everything really. The battle system is the most realized and dynamic of this trio. It shows how closely the Phantom Thieves rely on each other in both combat and in everyday school life as they attempt to change the hearts of society for the better. Golden is much more down to earth, kinda literally, since this takes place in the very rural setting of Inaba. I feel like this cast might be the most close-knit of any in the series, partly because it feels like Inaba itself, in a sense, is a character in the story. The tone is so sunny, bright, and vibrant, which you might not expect from a game about solving a murder mystery surrounding multiple deaths. But if you want to talk about more direct, depressing tones, look no further than Persona 3. The Switch got the enhanced PSP port of Portable, which took the freedom of exploring Tatsumi Port Island and made it into more of a point-and-click adventure/visual novel with RPG elements. There is a whole argument of which versions of 3 is better, which is more immersive, the fact that a Portable has Kotone's route, making it my personal favorite. It's still somewhat hotly debated today. However, Persona 3 Reload has been announced for Switch 2, so if you want to dive into the series, now is a great time to do so. I think I'd start with 4 and play either 5 or Reload when that releases, just so you can better appreciate seeing the series evolve from there. Oh, but Persona 4 Revival was also just announced, and that's definitely coming to the Switch too. There's so many options right now. It is a good time to be a Persona fan, especially if you have like 250 hours to play all 3 of these games. It is a lot, but I love this series. However, through all of this, we still need to remember, Persona 1 and 2 never get enough love. Where are their remakes?
What can I say about Super Mario RPG that hasn't already been said? Well, For starters, I like it better than any of the Paper Mario games, and maybe that's because I was around when the SNES version released. So when Nintendo announced a Switch version of Super Mario RPG, I was over the moon excited for this. The original Nintendo and Square collab was one of my favorite games on the Super NES, and they did it so right on the Nintendo Switch. I'm so happy that this exists. Just look at the attention to detail here. Everything looks like those kind of chibi pre-rendered 1990s sprites, but done in actual full real 3D. The combat mechanics feel just as good as they did on the Super NES. The music is absolutely wonderful. I have no notes. This is not just one of my favorite RPGs on the Switch, but one of my favorite games overall.
A full 3D reimagining of the third game in the Mana series, previously exclusive to Japan in its original Super Famicom form. I was a big fan of this remake back when it first released in 2020, and I'd eagerly recommend it now to anyone looking for a nice, polished action RPG to sink their teeth into. I'd even say the combat here still feels a little smoother and snappier than the more recent visions of Mana, but the rub here is which platform you're playing it on. I originally played and reviewed this game on PS4, where the experience was superior with a smooth 60 FPS performance and improved visuals compared to the Switch's 30 FPS and lower fidelity. If you have a Switch 2 though, now that changes everything. The Switch 2 bumps Trials of Mana's performance up to 60 FPS and improves the graphics as well, making this excellent remake an easy recommendation on Nintendo's new and improved hybrid console.
Ring Fit Adventure is an RPG, and it's a damn good one. It's got turn-based combat, it's got zany, lovable characters, it's got stats and leveling up, it's got everything an RPG usually has, only you're battling with exercise. And I think this really gets over what most fitness games struggle with, the gamify aspect. Usually it's like, oh, do 5 squats because that's going to make you healthy. And I don't want to do that, that's boring. I want to do 5 squats because it's going to defeat a dragon monster, okay? There's elemental weaknesses as well, which kind of motivates you to do reps you don't really like to do. Like, I don't like doing sit-ups, but it does a lot more damage to the dumbbell monster, so I've got to do some sit-ups. And I really love that about this. I love the mix of overworld jogging, going into battles. It is legit a fantastic RPG, and the best fitness game I've ever played in my life. Also, there's a rhythm game mode with Mario and Zelda music, so you know it's a good time.
Mario & Rabbids Sparks of Hope is a lot more different than its predecessor than you might think. It eschews the linear world design of the previous game and gives us a more open zone kind of design, allowing us to explore each world with relative freedom, which takes some of the edge away from each battle. Overall, I'd say this game is a little bit easier than the one before it, and that might be a turnoff to some, but for me, I think it strikes a good balance. Battles are no longer based on a grid design, and now you have more freedom of movement when you are planning your moves out. I like this approach because it makes battles feel a little bit more free-form than they did before, and that's especially true when you actually take the sparks into account. So now, in addition to having to carefully select the people on your team, you also need to carefully select the sparks that accompany them. They'll augment your abilities, like giving your weapons bonus fire damage, or making you electric while you're dashing through enemies. It adds an additional layer of depth to the gameplay that I found really appealing. There's nothing quite like pulling off a sick move in a strategy game like this. And if you played the original, the characters are still zany, Rabbid Peach is still a queen, but the stakes are a little bit higher, and the story goes in a more interesting direction than the original one did. Sparks and Hope and Kingdom Battle both stand together while being relatively different experiences, and I think that's great. Sparks of Hope is just the one I prefer.
Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is one of the earliest games I reviewed on GVG, and it still stands out to me all these years later. It's a game that I wasn't expecting a lot out of. I thought it looked cute, the premise certainly stood out to divide your time between farming and the combat, but I thought it would just be a one and done thing that's like, okay, let's check this out, this has some potential, let's see what it has to offer. And instead I found myself enamored by the cast of characters, really pulled into what was going on, and probably most shockingly, because I am just not a farm sim guy, really into the rice farming that is a core part of this game. Because the better your yield of rice, the more powerful Sakuna becomes. And the way it evolves is something I've never seen before in terms of farming games, because it's usually grid based. You push this here, you put this seed here, you put this seed here. When you start Sakuna, there's no guide. You have to pace it out yourself, figure out the best tips, figure out how it actually works, and as you get better, it offers more guidance so that you can take the knowledge you've gained and just make it more and more efficient. And I found myself just completely taken in by the gameplay loop of farming each season, as well as going out further and further into the wild in order to do the actual combat with monsters. It's a great time, and if you've not checked it out before, I highly recommend Sakuna.
Fire Emblem really has moments of capturing the hearts of people and then kind of falling off in between those entries. Awakening brought people back, and then Three Houses elevated the series to heights we've never seen before. And for good reason. Three Houses has perhaps the most fleshed out setting of any Fire Emblem title. Every corner of Fodland has history and characters that tie to their classes, their ancestors, their homeland, and each other. And I feel like it's really the cast that brought people together. You choose one of three houses and mentor that group as your students at Garreg Mach Monastery. It's, for the most part, the same turn-based role-playing game that you're used to if you played Fire Emblem before, but this contextualizes them in a personal way. You watch your units grow, choose what they're proficient at, and witness their growth as time passes and the story goes through its twists and turns. And there is just so much content here. I still need to do the Golden Deer route. I know. I've done everything else and the Cinder Shadows DLC. I think I'm just waiting for the right time. People rallied with their chosen houses with all of their hearts, and I think this take on separate paths to one story is how Three Houses succeeds where fates may have stumbled. In retrospect, this game is the modern black sheep of the series with how differently it approaches so many aspects than its usual mainstays. And while we're talking about it, we might as well also touch on Engage, the most recent Fire Emblem title. This game took a lot of what was successful for Three Houses and trimmed it down in scale. While that game has a large emphasis on relations, building bonds between students, and a lot of character interaction at Garreg Mach Monastery, Engage toned it down and focused a bit more on gameplay. The story and characters here are a lot more, let's say, whimsical. I have found that many people think that the characters are very hit or miss in personality or overall design, and the story certainly does not have as many layers as Three Houses. But it wasn't really designed to. This is a celebratory title for the Fire Emblem franchise, and includes many protagonists from every mainline game in the series, allowing you to engage with them and borrow their skills. Where this game may lack in story, it makes up for some of the most robust gameplay that this series has seen. This is not a sequel to Three Houses, which is why I think that people felt somewhat disappointed by it. And honestly, I think I prefer Engage between the two, as it appeals more to classic FE fans, especially from before the Awakening days. Both games on Switch were designed to be quite different from each other in tone, in setting, and framework. And it's okay if you like one more than the other, I promise.
Shin Megami Tensei 5 is an absolute classic. You're a high school student who fuses with a proto-fiend Aogami to turn into what is called a Nahobino, a type of super-powered warrior who can fight demons and angels and everything in between. It takes place in modern-day Tokyo and then kind of a blasted-out version of it called Da'at. So you're spending half of your time in a fully normal Tokyo and the other half in the future of Tokyo, where everything has gone badly. It has you battling and befriending both demons and angels, fighting gods. All the hallmarks of JRPGs are here, and it is one of the best examples of kind of a crazy, dark story that you can find on the Nintendo Switch. If you haven't played Shin Megami Tensei 5 and you even have a passing interest in Persona, you absolutely owe it to yourself to check these out. Derek has a wonderful breakdown of every Shin Megami Tensei game here on the channel that you should watch. It's several hours, but if you want the cliff notes, this is a darker, grittier version that led to the creation of Persona.
Chrono Cross gets a lot of guff simply for not being Chrono Trigger, and it's wholly undeserved. A wonderful gem of an RPG originating from the late PS1 days, Chrono Cross is an excellent game in its own right, featuring an enchanting world bursting with organic beauty and vivid colors, a gorgeous, emotionally resonant soundtrack from Chrono Trigger virtuoso Yasunori Mitsuda, and a solid turn-based battle system that emphasizes strategic use of elemental strengths and weaknesses. While some may understandably balk at the huge roster of playable characters that emphasizes breadth over depth, and Chrono Cross does have some pacing issues, particularly in relation to it being a sequel to Chrono Trigger, the main characters Serge and Kid still have an intriguing journey to follow, and the story does eventually tie things heavily back into Chrono Trigger. It just takes a while to get there. And while 2022's new Radical Dreamers Edition initially stumbled out of the gate with extremely poor performance, there has since been an update fixing various issues and bringing the frame rate up to a smooth 60 FPS, even on the original Switch. This one's an absolute steal at just $20.
Harvestella came out in the year where Square released like 50 games, and it's so delightful, but so few people know. On the face of it, it's a farming game. Harvest is in the title, but really this is a JRPG. You're going to be going into dungeons, fighting enemies with real-time combat, going to towns and doing side quests. The farming part aids the dungeons though. It's about using what you farm as health items, or selling it to get gold to buy more weapons. It's a brilliant loop of farming and combat and exploration, and the world is just so vast and open and beautiful. There's also a daily calendar system to the game, so you've got to balance what exactly it is you're doing. Do you want to spend the day mostly farming, mostly going to towns and doing side quests, mostly advancing the story? Because it's all valuable, and every month what you're growing changes as well because the season changes, so there's a lot of depth and change and variety, and I highly recommend Harvestella.
For a long time, I was quite vocal about not being an RPG fan. For me, RPGs could be difficult to get into. I did not like being interrupted with random encounters when I was trying to explore the overworld, and that could be difficult for me. But over the years, more and more RPGs were doing away with random encounters, and that made them a little bit more approachable for me. After Hero was added to Super Smash Bros., I decided I was going to give Dragon Quest XI a try. Thankfully, it had a lengthy demo that allowed you to transfer your progress to the main game once it came out, and I sank my teeth so hard into that Dragon Quest meat. What am I saying? That 10 hours were some of the most magical hours of gameplay I've ever experienced. Dragon Quest had completely drawn me into its fantasy setting, to its whimsical world. Your first party member, Eric, he's like the coolest dude. He'd do anything for you. I was so attached to these characters that I had barely spent any time with. Package all that up with an incredible soundtrack and the staple Akira Toriyama art style, and honestly, I don't know why I'd never given these a chance before. These were made for me. By the time I had rolled credits on Dragon Quest XI's, it had firmly supplanted itself as one of my very favorite games of all time.
I've never played a game quite like Mario & Luigi Brothership, and by that, I mean the way I actually played it is completely different from anything else I've played before, where it wasn't exactly me playing through the game, it was my son, and he was just immediately taken in by the graphics and the pantomime of the brothers that he got really invested in it. So he played it himself, and he's only 4. He just got that invested in what was going on, and while he could figure certain things out himself, going to certain goals, figuring out certain puzzles, he wasn't able to beat bosses or the like. He often had to run. He often didn't fight. And it made for something completely different for me, because here I come to help out my son, and I'm faced with a game where he doesn't have all the best equipment. He's not leveled up enough. He is at a severe disadvantage every step of the way, and yet, by learning the patterns of each of the enemies, I was able to overcome every obstacle along the way. I could help him get past those bits, and then he'd like to see the next one. And I would have paid attention with him to play with him, except I wanted to experience it on my own, and I thought, well, he's not going to get that far. And to my surprise, he stuck with it through most of the game. He never did a single side quest, so I have no idea how those are involved, and yet Brothership stands out as a really good RPG to me. Yes, the pacing is slow. Yes, you get stuff at a slow rate, but it's such a unique experience, at least for me, to play with my son in that way, to have those challenges, to see where the battle system shines. It made for a special experience, even though I've still not beaten it. We ended up stopping right before the final island because I think it just became too much for him, a little maybe too intense, because he was invested in the story. He liked seeing what was going on with Bowser. He liked seeing what was going on with Peach. He became very attached to Connie, and it makes it stand out as an RPG experience on the Switch. I know that's not exactly a relatable experience when it comes to Brothership. There are issues as far as pacing, but I didn't mind them. I honestly didn't find the pacing to be all that bad at all. I thought it was a fun romp throughout every time I came to it, and granted, maybe that's because I was getting the highlights of each chapter, but even going back through and helping them get other things within those islands and figuring things out, there's still a lot of charm to enjoy, and it stands out as one of my favorite RPGs on the Switch.
There is no way I could discuss RPGs on the Switch and not bring up the Tales series. While Graces F Remastered is a great entry and Symphonia Remastered is a game, I think Tales of Vesperia stands as the strongest title on the Switch. This game is about an ordeal that threatens the entire natural order of the world after following one man's quest to repair his home's central plumbing. Basically. Yuri Lowell is one of my favorite protagonists because he's kind of already the sort of character who has matured and learned through certain experiences. When you really look at it, this game is more about him being like a mentor to others in your party, which is honestly one of my favorite casts in the series. They're just so mismatched, but that's exactly what makes them all so interesting in events and in skits. This is also the enhanced definitive edition that includes more content and even 2 new party members from the PS3 version that never came overseas. Battles all play out in real time. Each character is equipped with a regular combo and special attacks called arts that you can assign yourself. As you progress and learn more skills from leveling up and also using equipment, battles become a lot more fleshed out and varied. There are moments where you can compare the combat to a fighting game more than a JRPG. As with some Tales games, it does take a while to get to that point on your first playthrough, but the dynamic and real-time take on battles always makes this a refreshing series to come back to. But I feel like its strength really lies in the characters themselves. If you love a colorful world with fun writing, also running at 60 FPS on Switch too, then this is definitely one to try out. It is also one of the only games to use the usually nonsensical titles in the game itself. I still don't know what a Symphonia or a Zestiria is, but Vesperia is a pretty important name in the game, and I just really appreciate that.
Back in 2022, we got what is to date my favorite Pokemon game in Pokemon Legends Arceus. I love the idea of just a more open world Pokemon game where you can see monsters out in the field, do battle with them in a more organic way, and it's not focused on trainer and gym culture, it's more about just an adventure. This is what I want from the Pokemon series. This is why I'm hyped over the moon for Pokemon Legends ZA to come out later this year for the Switch 2, but this is the game that started it, and it did it in such a cool way. You're transported back into essentially like a feudal Japan setting with Pokemon at your side and just a completely different vibe to what the series has seen up to that point. This is a fantastic example of what you should play if maybe you're feeling a bit fatigued from the traditional Pokemon formula. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out today, then play ZA when it comes out later this year.
The Game Boy Advance ushered in a bold new era for the Blue Bomber with the introduction of the action RPG Mega Man Battle Network series. Featuring an extremely unique blend of real-time combat with turn-based elements in its battle system, Battle Network's gameplay was shockingly fresh back in the 2000s and remains so to this day. The Battle Network series also featured some of the GBA's very best chiptune soundtracks and pixel art, to say nothing of the series' likable cast of characters and fun stories reminiscent of a Saturday morning anime. The games are brought down a bit by a frustratingly high random encounter rate, but the Legacy Collection thankfully mitigates that a bit with an optional Buster Max mode, which maxes out the power of Mega Man's Mega Buster and reduces those random encounters to momentary trifles at worst. Just make sure you remember to turn it off for boss fights. While it's true that the 6 mainline games comprising this collection are not necessarily created equal, with Mega Man Battle Network 3, 5, and 6 being the best and 4 being kind of a stinker, on the whole this series is absolutely worth playing for any action RPG fan, and the Legacy Collection is easily the best way to experience it today.
Star Ocean The Second Story R is in a very similar league to Dragon Quest III HD 2D. It takes a classic RPG, one of the very best of all time, and basically HD 2Difies it, but not branded as HD 2D, even though it looks very, very similar. You've got full-on voice acting, gorgeous lighting, gorgeous environments, fantastic sprites, and it just cherishes everything that made the PlayStation game so good in the first place, but goes even further. So many great quality of life improvements, the combat is even better than ever, and the soundtrack? Man, the soundtrack is phenomenal. This series has always had such a cool mix between sci-fi and fantasy, and this is just the quintessential Star Ocean game. If you've never tried this series, this is the one to go for. It's one of the coolest and most respectful remakes I've ever played in my life.
OMORI is a game that's made me feel all kinds of things. It's a very emotionally charged game, exploring themes that might not be comfortable for a lot of people. But it's that level of discomfort that attracts me to the game so much. This Earthbound-inspired top-down turn-based RPG puts you in the shoes of OMORI. He wakes up in a void that he says he's been in for as long as he can remember. He has the ability to go into his own headspace where he can talk to his friends. It's a stark contrast from that white space, full of color and life and imagination. It's in these sections where you'll team up with OMORI's friends in order to fight monsters. The game uses a cool emotion-based system in its combat. The different emotions your characters can feel will affect their stats in different ways, and they're paired together with these really charming up-close portraits of their faces. So when a character's sad, well, you're gonna see that. The way the system engages with itself is so interesting. Certain moves will put your characters in certain emotional states. The emotions fit together in kind of a rock, paper, scissors fashion, and you have to use them to your advantage in order to win battles as efficiently as possible. While I think the exploration part of the game leaves a lot to be desired, the actual combat and story on offer here is really great. Just maybe make sure you're in the right headspace before you play.
Xenoblade Chronicles might be the RPG of the Switch, and by that I mean the entire series, because the entire series is on the Switch. From Definitive Edition to 2 to 3 to the DLC for 2 and 3 to Xenoblade Chronicles X, to have the entirety of the franchise on the Switch is a massive boon for this series, and something that I highly recommend anybody that has still not experienced any of these games to pick up one and try. You can start with any of them. There's no real order to the way things play out unless you count the DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Otherwise, things can be experienced in any order you see fit, and you can still find plenty of enjoyment from the stories found within. There are some fantastic characters, fantastic scenarios. This game just sticks with you, and I'm so happy to see it evolve and become accepted like this over time. This is a series that I always found a lot of potential in, but didn't actually finish for a while until 2 absolutely enraptured me. And yes, 2 has some issues in terms of tone and things like that, but it still stands out as one of my favorite games for the Nintendo Switch, just because of how powerful and how invested I became in the final few hours of it. It really built up in such a wonderful way that I have to recommend it, and honestly that applies to the entire series. All of them have great characters, great scenarios, great stories that tie into things that make more sense as you play more games. And to have Xenoblade Chronicles X here, which is just a fantastic exploration of a planet and separate from everything else, just completes it. As I said, it feels like the RPG franchise for the Switch, and I'm really interested in what Monolith Soft decides to do next for the Switch too.
Boy, do I never hear enough people talk about Valkyria Chronicles. Imagine the fictional medieval worlds that other RPGs set themselves in, and then throw guns and a tank on top of them. The game follows the Gallian militia in the region of Europa, the fictional setting loosely based on Europe during World War II. You command your troops in Squad 7, who all have specific attributes and roles. Each are able to move a certain distance and perform tasks within their movement phase using action points. A scout, for example, is not very robust, but they can get a read for the terrain and other units in front of them, while snipers, on the other hand, can strike over a large distance. You take on the role of Welkin, who commands the army's main tank. They can maneuver around the battlefield, strike enemies with various weapons, and issue specific commands to the army. The turn-based movement phases, and the freedom to position your characters wherever you please, is what helps this game stand out from other tactical RPGs. The story takes characters from a rural town getting wrapped up into the conflicts of war as they try to bring peace, while also discovering the mysteries of the Valkyria. Somewhat like Fire Emblem, each character has certain strengths, weaknesses, and not to mention that they're all actual characters with their own personalities and relevance to the story. The game has critical acclaim, and yet it hasn't really reached as many people as I believe it should have. It is very excellently made with a beautiful artistic style, like pencil sketches and drawings in motion. Also on the Switch 2 is Valkyria Chronicles 4, and you might be wondering, why jump to 4? Pretty much all the events happening in both this title and the original are happening concurrently, but following a different faction, Squad E. In this game, you also take control of the commander of your army's tank. Claude enlists in the war with his childhood friends to help save their homeland of Gallia. Much of what made the first Valkyria Chronicles great is also present here, with a bit more of a cinematic take. Much of this game takes place in a snowy setting and introduces a whole new cast of rather memorable characters. Like Odin, who has definitely never been in another game before.
Call me Odin. Oh, the roster says Thomas Kevin? That man is long dead. I will become a god of war. I see beyond the shadow. Futile. Oh god, I don't want to die!
It adds a new class, the Grenadier, and implements a system called Brave that can help a unit survive when they're on the verge of death. As before, this truly focuses on the characters of the world. If you've played the first title and the Japanese-only Valkyria Chronicles 3, then you'll definitely appreciate how this helps to flesh out the world of Europa. Both games have this interesting way of presenting a style that is clearly anime-inspired, but with a mostly grounded military setting that makes the characters feel more like real people. There's still some very fantasy-like aspects, which is what the Valkyria in the title is meant to invoke, but it often reins it into a surprisingly realistic and believable setting at times. It is pleasantly refreshing.
I was extremely late to Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. I actually didn't play the GameCube original until 2020, which is something I'll never forgive myself for, but it made me appreciate the Switch version all the more because I know firsthand exactly how expensive and how difficult it is to get your hands on a copy of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door in the GameCube resellers market. So while I understand and mostly agree with complaints about the 30 FPS presentation of Thousand Year Door on the Switch, I have to say that I'm just happy this game exists, and honestly, for a turn-based RPG, 30 FPS doesn't really impact it the same way a more action-heavy game would. I love everything about this game. Goombella is my favorite companion in the series, but every level, every world is so thoughtfully crafted, each dungeon is fun to play, and the combat system is just so much fun. The audience mechanics, everything about this reminds me of why I love kind of the wacky nature of Mario RPGs so much.
The first 6 Final Fantasy games have been re-released time and again over the years on various platforms, to varying degrees of quality and success, but the recent Pixel Remaster series makes a strong, though not necessarily definitive, case for being the best versions of these classics yet. The newly remastered pixel art looks great, and each title features a freshly rearranged soundtrack by series maestro Nobuo Uematsu that can be swapped with the originals whenever you like. But most importantly, the Pixel Remasters feature wonderful quality of life updates such as experience and money boosters, as well as a random encounter toggle that can basically eliminate any grinding, allowing you to tailor the gameplay to your preferences. Unfortunately, the Pixel Remasters do lack some additional content introduced in prior re-releases of these games, like extra dungeons and weapons, but these stone-cold classics are regarded as such for good reason, and it's hard to argue against the Pixel Remaster series being a fantastic way to experience them. Yep, even Final Fantasy II.
And there you have it, 30 plus RPGs that you can play right now on your Nintendo Switch. You can probably beat them all in like 2,000 hours. And if there's a game that you want to scroll back to right now, or if you're curious to try one of these in the future, everything is timestamped. I heard you like it when we put markers on these things so that people don't have to watch the whole video. What a concept. But as I mentioned in the beginning, there are so many RPGs on the Switch, so please let us know some of your favorites, especially ones that we were not able to highlight here today. You will most definitely find something new down below. A hidden gem, perhaps. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to GVG for potentially more lists like this in the future. Take care everyone, till we meet again.